Well. How's it going?
Going great. I'm so glad that we get to catch up. It feels like it's been forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, always so glad to see you, Karen, and to all of you. This is Dr. Karen Colbert. And one of my favorite people, basically. And I think we met during the pandemic, right?
Yes.
At
Yeah.
a summer program at University of Michigan. And we've just been in touch ever since because like I think you're like one of the coolest people I know. So thank you. So just I we posted about like your background and things like that. But in case folks didn't get a chance to read about Karen, aka Dr. Colbert, uh she is a mathematics professor, right, in a tribal college in Michigan, also a data scientist and a national keynote speaker. So can you tell us a little bit about, your professional identities a little bit?
Sure. So I do identify as a faculty, right? So a lot of times when I do my keynote speaking, people will think like, "Oh, she must be in administration." I identify as a faculty, and that's really important because I feel like as a faculty member, the lens with which we work, because we are so close to the students, it has a deeper impact on what's happening, what we call boots on the ground, right? Boots on the ground. And when you and I actually met, I was kind of in that space where I had never been around other scholars that had done data work in a qualitative way. And so my identity as an instructor, being in that kind of a space, totally changed. So I'm so thankful that my previous students, before I learned and was enlightened, forgave me. I think I've always done my best as an instructor, but I feel like taking a class like that in an immersive space with scholars that were just so hungry for knowledge completely changed my identity as, and not only an instructor, but as a professional that is trying to cultivate the minds of the next generation. So yes, I am a professor at a tribal college. I'm a data scientist. Um, and the newest part of my identity has been the keynote speaking. I say that, I get the privilege to say the quiet things out loud because there's so many things going on in the world that many of us don't have an advocate that can speak to those things in an authentic way. So I've been able to have the privilege to do that. In addition to, I am a mom. I have 9 children. I've been married for over 20 years. And a lot of the things about the complexities of being able to manage all the things have been an integral part of my identity as just a human in general. So,
Wow. So, I've been telling this in the past few episodes, like we love inviting folks to the show who are multi-hyphenate, and you are definitely that. And actually, what you mentioned about like showing up authentically, makes you one of the reasons why you're a great speaker, from that space. Um, and that actually reminded me of I have invited Karen twice. So one, I taught intro to education research workshop at Johns Hopkins, and Karen was one of the guest speakers on quantitative research, and also um, was it this year? Oh, well, not this year. It was last year. Last spring, I was co-organizing a symposium for the AAI at Stanford, and we were trying to find like, okay, who can be a great speaker? And it's about advancing diversity in AI research and education. And off the bat, I was like, we got to get Karen in here, especially she works at a tribal college, and we really need more of the indigenous scholars showing up in those spaces. And so I really appreciate you actually going there and dropping some knowledge on something that like not a lot of people know about. And then I don't know if you wanted to just mention like what you talked about briefly
Yeah.
at Stanford.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I was invited, the track that I was invited to speak at, I believe it was called Increasing Diversity in AI Research and Education.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because I work in that space 24/7 in the education space, I think there's a lot of people that can talk about the lived experiences. But then when you bring that into higher education and into the classroom, it does take on a completely different flavor. And I'm always surprised because when you're surrounded, like, well, this is just where I live. This is how life is everywhere. And then you leave the res, like you leave the reservation, you're like, oh, wait. This is not how it is everywhere. Everybody doesn't just know. When you work at a tribal college, we're one of the few places in higher education that our entire mission statement centers around cultivating language, revitalizing culture in everything in an authentic way. And so I was able to come to Stanford University and to share some of the, the systemic inequities that are still persisting. Even though we have lots of resources, there are still inequities that are rooted in everyday solutions that need to be dismantled. And so I was able to bring that to the forefront, just issues about how knowledge is shared, right? The belief systems that we have on the reservation about who owns knowledge, what is knowledge. And that's really difficult because we cultivate minds of people who would be considered reentry students. Myself would be considered non-traditional. My own journey in education, I think, helps me to be able to speak to that because I was a stay-at-home mom with an engineering degree. And when my friend Trinice from Choctaw Nation said, it's time to come back, it's time to come back to the res, I literally took the bring your kids to work. I took it very seriously. Like literally, I literally brought my kids with me to work because it was that important to me that they see what are the benefits of being immersed in the community to do a good work. And so when I came back, that was kind of the beginning of, okay, how do we not just teach the way we were taught, which is what most people do. Like, well, I went to school, I went to college, I'm going to teach the way that I was taught. But in doing that, you're only perpetuating those same systemic issues, right? And you're wondering, like, oh, the students need to be fixed. Oh, the faculty need to be fixed. No, the system needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I talked about were not just, oh, some little hacks and little tips and little tricks and what textbook to use and, how do you grade for equity, right? But what are the systems that are in place that are actually creating the larger chasm between the haves and the have-nots? And
Mm,
in this wake of AI making everything more accessible, but at the same time making it inaccessible because you're still expecting people to think in a very particular way, then you're still only navigating that one path and saying, well, it's for everybody, but it's really not. And sometimes it's not intentional, but there are other people that believe, you know what, the system is doing exactly what the system was designed to do. And
mm,
if you're asking me, well, why aren't more of your students showing up in these spaces? I'm going to tell you, this is the system that's not working. When I came back from being out of school for 10 years and I went back into higher education, it was very, very challenging because there was a world that didn't exist when I left. And I had an engineering degree. So I knew STEM, I knew about software, I knew about, some of those higher level rigorous, this is a rigorous degree program. And when I came back into higher education, not only did I feel unprepared, but I felt unsupported, right?
mm,
I was told that, well, one of the classes that I took, I'll never forget on that first day, I showed up and I had my book and I had my, laptop and I was told your homework assignments are due in R. I don't teach R. I remember thinking like, what is R? Like, is that a letter? So that was like my journey to YouTube University and Stack Overflow, trying to find people in other countries that were actually sharing their lectures online back then. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, this was like 2018, 2019, but I just felt lost. And I couldn't imagine offering that kind of a learning environment to my students, right? So using that experience and saying, okay, I remember what that was like. Go Google it. Well, I don't even know, what do I ask the Googles? What do I say? Like how do I put the keywords in, and how do I sift through 1,000 hits or 1 million hits? Like what do I do with it? How do I make sense of that? And that was kind of the beginning of me understand, like I would call it an awakening of, okay, this is what it is to be on both sides as the student learner and then as the educator, and having to decide with the mirror in front of me, how do I want to show up? How do I want this to look when my children are looking to me and asking me, I need help with the answer, because they've been told all K through 12, somebody else has the answer and they'll give it to you, right? And you just need to keep repeating that, as opposed to teaching them how to think for themselves, and also trying to teach them that the voice that they have, that there's nothing wrong with their voice, right?
Yeah.
But being told, you need to, that's, you don't have a good voice, you need to learn. So then that really teaches you to stop thinking for yourself, because you're constantly waiting for somebody else to tell you, what am I supposed to think? What is the right answer? And it really stunts the growth of what education is supposed to be, which is piecing together information so that you can make sense of the world.
Wow. Wow. That's that's a lot, and this is why Karen is here today. um, yeah, I can go in so many different directions and asking you things. I mean, you were talking about, okay, you were not in the workforce or in school for like 10 years, but you were in engineering, and then also thinking back on something you said even earlier about how showing up for students, especially like showing them like when you get out of the res, if you want to do that, like not everywhere looks like this. And so I was just wondering like where that um perspective came from. Like, would you say that like when you were also a young person, you had to figure it all out yourself as well?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, there were a lot of, so I was born in the 1900s, folks. Right. We might be trying to, we just graduated from high school ourselves, but my kids would probably say otherwise. But yeah, in the 1900s, there was a huge initiative for women in engineering, and so that was what I was told. Like, this is, you want to have a good life, you have to figure this out. But I was also told you had to speak a certain way. I had to change my accent. I mean, it was literally living a life of code switching, and that makes it really challenging, because when you become an adult, you're constantly trying to figure out, who am I allowed to be now? Because I was told that, in order to belong in this space, I have to XYZ. And I think even as a young person, I kind of in my mind was like, oh, in order to get from A to B, it's a straight path and you have to do it this way. But when I think about how I went from my youth to what I do today, it was not a straight path. I literally made it up. I completely made it up. There wasn't any one person that I would say, oh, that person did that, so this is how I'm going to get from point A to point B. So it's always been this kind of experimental life. So my goal as a young person was to be an astronaut. That's what I want. I wanted to be part of the astronaut corps. And I wanted to be like Mae Jemison. Like that was, she
I
was,
love her. I love her. Sorry.
like that's who I want to be when I grow up. So I
Oh,
want to be an astronaut. So how can I do that? And even figuring out how to become an astronaut was such a mystery, because there isn't like, okay, you want to be an astronaut, you put in your astronaut application. You know what I mean? Like, it's a
yeah.
lot of those protocols are so ambiguous. How do you get to the other side? How do you even get eligible? How do you know when there's spots open? And so even in that, trying to experiment and make it up, I chose to go into the military because I had this theory that, well, that would give me an opportunity to be more competitive for some of the spots, because I noticed that a lot of people that became astronauts had a military background of some sort, and trying to ask around and constantly telling people this is my goal, and kind of hopping from one thing to the other, thinking, okay, I'm going to piece these things together and it's going to create the result of an astronaut. And actually, it created something even better because I got to serve my country during the war. I had the opportunity to have my family and, really embrace a deep, thoughtful spiritual journey that I was able to cultivate in my own children and support while I was, all the while I'm thinking, oh, I'm not in school, but all the while I was learning, right? Piecing together all this data, all this information to figure out what's the next step. Because there wasn't another stay-at-home mom with an engineering degree with 9 kids living in a rural, living in a rural community that could be like, okay, and now the next step is to teach college or go back to college. So yeah, it was definitely a journey of looking at both mentors. So there's the three. There's the mentors, the coaches, and then the sponsors.
Mm.
And as far as I'm concerned, you have always been somebody that I've looked up to as a sponsor. Like
Oh,
the
hey.
people that the people that will look to you and say, you know what, we're going to throw your name in the hat because we know you can do it, right? I mean, and that's the kind of thing that when I think about how I got to where I am, having all three of those entities as an integral part of my life has been fundamental. Like if I would think about how would I create this result if I took away all of the other circumstances, I would make sure that I always had mentors, sponsors, coaches to keep me on that path.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for considering me a sponsor. No, I definitely um advocate for you like 100%, like for any future opportunities there. And yeah, I love that you're sharing your story. And it makes me think of a lot of actually two main things, right? Where earlier when you were talking, you talked about how when you were younger, people were telling you like talk a certain way. It's kind of like this respectability politics, or I don't know if that's the right word. Actually, it's more like assimilationist,
Yeah.
right? Um, and getting that kind of information thrown at you by, I'm assuming these are like more adult
Yep. All
than
the adults.
and how do you, and then it just made me think about how do you overcome hearing that kind of information where it's so limiting, right, for your spirit. And, it's kind of like garbage in, garbage out, but sometimes it's like, oh, these are adults that I respect. Like they must know something that I don't, and I think other people they may take that to heart, like in a different way than you have. And I feel like now you recognize that, okay, like maybe some of their suggestions help you, but then some of it's probably also very limiting. And so like learning when to like filter out the information that's limiting versus like generative for, I guess, your
Yeah. I
ability,
mean,
I mean your personhood.
yeah. I mean, there's definitely. So when you think about what growth is, right? If you think of it as like a tree, right? Everybody has to have water, sunlight, nutrients, dirt to grow or water, if you're an aqua plant, right? So we know that the roots must grow. And I think that what happens is we spend so much time in those foundational, those fundamental areas that it's hard to pull apart from, okay, if this was the fundamental, at what point do I take these fundamentals and then add my own spices to it, right? When is that okay? At what point am I not considered an engineer if I don't do X, Y, Z? I mean, it was even to the point where, I mean, I'm not really wearing like bright colors now, but it was like if I have a solid color on top, I can maybe have a floral on the bottom. Like I was really like, okay, I don't want to do anything that's going to be too wow, because I
Wow.
want people to be like, oh, an engineer would never, dress like that. That's too, flashy or that's too whatever, So it was really me trying to really figure out how do I navigate that space to create something that is authentically me? Because you do, I think even as adults, we spend a lot of time questioning the choices that we make and the results that they create. And oh, if I had done this one different and that one different, when at the end of the day, sometimes things happen because that was the way it was meant to happen. But when we try to force it down and we try to shove it down to create, this package that we think, that's when, those thoughts of disappointments, those shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and it can make it really hard to be able to create a space for you as an adult when you're trying to be something that actually doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think about like when you're learning a new language, when people are learning a second language, when you learn your first language, our parents didn't sit down and go, okay, this is a verb. Right? And this is conjugation. No, it's like you're pointing at stuff and then you're like, door. She keeps saying door and I'm hitting the couch, but that's not the door, or I made a door, right? You're like making sense by piecing together words with actions and looking at expressions, right? Trying to piece those things together. And eventually, yes, you might say the wrong tense at the wrong time. You might say past tense when you meant present, and that gets corrected over time. But when you learn that second language, people act like the most important thing is verb conjugation and, punctuation and being able to read, when it's like, well, when I learned my first language, those things were not important. Nobody cared that I had proper punctuation. I couldn't even write. I was just trying to use the language to exist and to have my needs met, right? And to be able to express myself. And I think that that's where it comes into place. When we start in those fundamentals, you should be allowed to experiment, right? Because you're trying to understand the world around you, right? I'm trying to understand, how does this work? I'm navigating the space. And then once I'm ready to move into those advanced complexities, then yes, absolutely. Punctuation, conjugation, advanced notation where you're putting semicolons and things, right? That should come later because the foundation was laid. But when people are afraid to make mistakes, then that's where we put ourselves in this little bubble. And then you wonder why you're not creating the life and the results that you want because you're too afraid, because we've been told, quite frankly, that, mistakes are like death. There's a right answer, and you put these two numbers together, and it always creates this result. And if you don't get that, you did something wrong. And don't ever make a mistake because, mistakes are death, right? And then we wonder why we don't grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's definitely a place where we learn that ebb and the flow, and you can't be afraid to make mistakes and to try. And I think a lot of it comes with maturity. So as a young person, I wanted my teachers to like me very much. I wanted the people that were my peers to like me very much. So I feel like I did try to navigate in those spaces where most people would maybe be more agreeable to what I was saying. And then when I was offered opportunities to be in a club or in a leadership position, and they were like, no, 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 speak up. I was like, well, what, really? Like, just tell them what I really, are you sure? They don't really, I really think, I know, right? But they do. And it's so refreshing because you'll have young people that are like, I was thinking that, and I didn't think I was allowed to think that. I thought there was something wrong with me, right? And so trying that out for me fit really well. And I was able to use that to kind of evolve over time.
Wow. Wow. That's so powerful. Especially as like when you're little and just like you're trying to have this identity, like you love school, right? And
Yeah,
it's
I
oh,
love school.
I'm
I love
a
my
good
teachers.
girl. Yeah. You don't want to disappoint anybody, right? And then but then you have to there's almost like you're this good obedient student and then you're an adult and then in the real world and like how do you kind of break from those patterns. But I do love that you mentioned this whole idea of ebb and flow and uh being okay with making mistakes, and that's really that makes me think about like science, because there's a lot of experimentation and exploration involved. And actually, that also brings me to I know you have a new venture called The Science of Doing It All Without Losing. your mind or something like that, right? Can you can you tell us about that? Because it sounds like you're doing all these things, and how are you not losing your mind?
Yes, yes, I have done all the things, right? And I was thinking about managing. So I had a circumstance. I was homeschooling my children, and I do want to preface this by saying that yes, I had an engineering degree, but in Michigan, that was not a prerequisite to homeschool your children, right? So sometimes I didn't like telling people, "Oh yeah, my husband has a PhD and I have an engineering degree," because they'd be like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You can homeschool. That's fine. That's fine." So I didn't homeschool because I know everything. I homeschooled because I wanted to be in charge of making sure that my kids had access to the resources that they needed to thrive. And in a rural community, that can be tough. I mean, even in an inner city and an urban community, that can be tough because you have limitations by where you live and how to get to, one place to the other. In a rural community, we may just not have access to it within a 100-mile radius.
Wow.
It's just that's just the reality of it. And so I wanted to be able to make sure to help each and every one of my kids to get the needs that have their needs met in a way that worked for them. And so, so far that's been working really, really well. And then in 2022, which seems like forever ago, um, my son, one of my middle children, his name's Darren, he was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a bone cancer in his leg. And fighting childhood cancer with 8 children that don't have cancer and one that does, and chemo and all the things are more than 500 miles away. I was not a very good homeschooler. Like, I started to need a lot of help in that process. And so I started to create a community that could help my kids that didn't have cancer so that their needs were met and that they had the balance. I'm married. And so, my husband and I, we have our relationship. We were still working because I'm sorry, fighting childhood cancer is not free. I'm thankful for the GoFundMe, but we still had lots of expenses that, so we were both working all the while trying to figure out how do we make sure that we don't go crazy, that we don't lose out, but that also that, our son Darren was getting the best care that he needed, but that he could be a child. He was 11 years old when he was diagnosed. So he was a child and having to go through, the struggles of that and also the 8 children that didn't, right? You don't want them to feel like they're less important because you have the focus over here. So it really was a science to figure out how do I do this and not lose everything. So going through that, I learned to embrace, productivity and also learn how to embrace imperfection at the same time, which I was told you cannot do. You cannot be imperfect and productive at the same time. But I think I figured that out. And I just felt like this was a time that I could actually sit back and say, wow, I had this journey that I could actually share with people. How did I do it? Because I feel like all of the tools that I've collected over these last few, especially over the last few years, not that I haven't been, before, but especially over these last few years, I can share with the world because I can't be the only person who is an adult professional that has had to figure out how do I keep it together while my entire world feels like it's falling apart.
Wow. That is so powerful. And I hope your son is okay now.
He is thriving. He is walking. We went to physical therapy. So for those who don't, we had to push back the podcast a little bit. And we had to take him to physical therapy. Um, so so he is doing great, and we're hoping that he's actually going to graduate from physical therapy soon. So yeah, it's going really, really well. All the kids, they have their friend groups and they're playing instruments and they're playing outside and it's snowing here. So snowball fights and all the things. And then our older kids are embracing the college life, which is different, being the parent of a college student as opposed to being the professor of a college student. Learning learning to navigate that space and having those long talks with young people, with my young people about, why am I doing this and why is it going this way and teaching them how to have a voice for themselves and also do what they committed to do. I think one of the hardest parts is making commitments, but we're more likely to keep a commitment to somebody else than we are to keep a commitment to ourselves. And
Mm.
so when you are in the beginning of your academic journey or any kind of a journey like this launch, you're like, oh, the success part is so far away. Why don't I just, but if I was committing to other people, well, of course I'm not gonna, slack off because I've committed to do XYZ. So that is a relationship between you and yourself. And a lot of the parts of that brand of the science of doing it all without losing your mind is literally that. What are these proven techniques that I've embraced? They are research backed. There's lots of research about, a lot of these techniques. But what is it going to take so that I honor my commitments to myself?
Wow. Wow. I need to have a drink of this cocktail of evidence-based strategies for productivity. It sounds like. Um,
It works. I mean,
yeah, I feel like we can all like benefit from that. Especially the part of like, you know, like cultivating that it's for yourself, right? And because how can you pour from an empty cup? I mean, that's what I was thinking when you were talking. So I think, thank you for launching this. We'll definitely put the information on on our on our channel. Yeah, and we're really wrapping up now, but is there anything else that you want to share for our viewers on, I guess, like how to I mean anything, because I feel like you covered a lot, but if there's anything else that you'd like to share that I have not asked you about.
Um, I think I want to encourage people. I would hope that you're not going to look at this podcast and be like, well, of course, she's a unicorn. I think, no, maybe you weren't a parent who had to fight childhood cancer, but I'm sure that as a busy professional, there have been some really challenging situations that you've been in, that you have felt like you're all alone, that nobody knows what it's like to be you, that there's no hope, that all you have is survival mode, and that can be weary. And so I just want to encourage you that you're not alone, that there are other people that have been through it, that have developed systems and strategies, for myself personally, that have literally shifted my life from surviving to actually thriving. And that's both professionally and personally, because I went from complete overwhelm in my PhD program to a national keynote speaker, and I've gotten to the opportunity to speak at Stanford, Johns Hopkins, the National Science Foundation. I mean, I'm living a life that is really kind of amazing when you think about it, because I feel like I'm just a regular person. And when I put some of those strategies into place, it literally catapulted my entire trajectory into this space that I didn't even know existed.
Wow. Wow. Well, you are amazing, Karen. Don't you forget that. And I'm just really excited about this tool that you're sharing with the world. So thanks for sharing on our but yeah. Well, I guess we're at the end of the show. I'm sure like in the next seasons, we'll probably have you come back again because you just have so much to cover and talk about. Like it's amazing. We can really sit here for like days and days.
Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
I'm going to tell on you. So before we even recorded, we've actually been talking for almost 2 hours. I'm going to tell on you. We haven't got to catch up. It's so nice to see all the things that are working for you. And I'm so glad to be able to support your channel. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, check out Karen's website. We're gonna put it on the comment section and stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
And comment if you want me to come back and what do you want to hear about?
Yes, yes. All
Invite me back.
right.
Can't
Thank
wait.
you.
Thank you, Bama.
Yeah.